It's the Blue Vote Cafe, a little bit wonkish, a whole lot of fun. I'm David Schellenberg along with Rachel Oyster. We're the co-chairs for Democrats Abroad in Canada's capital region of Ottawa. Hello, Rachel.
Hello, David. How are you doing?
I am excellent. It is now 2026.
It is. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
How much snow have you shoveled, given that it's January in Ottawa?
Well, I live in a condo, so officially I should say no. But I was out at the family cottage up in the north, really far north, and shoveling snow around up there. And it's one of those things that I hated doing when I was a kid or when you lived in the house. But when you actually don't do it for a while and then you get a chance to do it, you really kind of enjoy it.
There's some satisfaction in it. A nice clean walk with even edges. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
If it's not too cold.
Yes. Well, it's the same way with washing the car or mowing the lawn, I guess, in the summer. It's like there is a certain enjoyment to it. Unless,
well, like anything, if you have to do it, it becomes a chore.
Yeah, exactly. Who's with us today, Rachel?
So today I've invited a new friend, another person I met at Crooked Con when I attended in November. Kathleen Miner is joining us from DC. I just was so impressed with her energy and her passion and everything she's already accomplished. I just thought it would make a fun conversation to have her join us in the cafe. So welcome, Kathleen.
Thank y'all for having me.
It's our pleasure. So I've already outed you as being in DC. Our usual question is, where in the world are you? But
I'm technically in Northern Virginia, but
all right.
DC for all intents and purposes. I am in the DMV. I'm at the very end of the metro, the blue line on the metro, if you're in the area.
Right.
I actually sort of almost know where that is.
Hey, there we go.
So you're voting in a purple state.
Yes.
And for those guests who join us from inside the U.S., we often ask, have you ever lived outside the country?
I have not. I was born and raised in what is now Marjorie Taylor Greene's Congressional District.
Okay.
We'll ask you questions about that.
Yeah. Have you ever traveled outside the country?
I haven't actually. Not yet.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
My brother and the rest of my family have, but I still hadn't made the trip yet.
Well, that's in your future, clearly.
There you go.
I hope so.
I have my passport. I just haven't used it for anything.
Right. And that's now a real ID.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Kathleen, you and I we ended up sitting side by side in the front row for a couple of sessions at Crooked Con, and we just got into a great conversation. And a lot of what you were telling me was you gave me some of the story of your political journey. So if you'd like to share that, we'd love to hear in detail.
Yeah. So I got my political start in politics when I was 14 on the 2008 Obama campaign. My mother was running our county Obama headquarters in Dalton, Georgia.
Right.
And so my brother and I were homeschooled, so we got roped into politics very early on.
That's an education.
I know, but my job became training the phone bankers who would come in. We would canvass. We didn't really have any. The local Democratic county committee there really wasn't interested in getting involved with the Obama campaign. So we really had to go out into the community and knock on doors and do a lot of grassroots mobilization to get anybody to build up our team, basically. And my job was to train the phone bankers who came in. We had, now when you phone bank, it's like 20 minutes on a Zoom call explaining, here's the program that we use to phone bank,
Right.
and then letting you go. But back then, they had us come down to a 12-hour Obama training camp in Atlanta.
Well,
Wow.
I know. And they taught us for 12 hours how to make calls, how to connect with voters, how to do a lot of active listening, and like the response part of phone banking, which now it's much more of a script. And we had a script back then, but there was a lot more of hearing the people that you're talking to and responding to them in real time. So it was a very different type of, it was a different campaign. So that's where I got my start. And then I kind of kept politics on the back burner. I got my when I went to college, I got my bachelor's in creative writing and fell back into politics in 2020 when, pandemic in the deep South, we were living around a lot of people that didn't believe the pandemic was real.
Oh, wow.
The Trump administration was awful. The Dalton, Georgia, where I grew up, has a very large Latino population. And so a lot of my friends had family that were being deported and all of this.
Oh my God.
And so I fell back into politics the day of John Lewis's funeral, actually, because it was such a depressing world of politics since Trump was elected in 2016. Because, like, for perspective, in 2008, Obama was elected. And between 2008 and 2016, Obama kind of became this larger than life person. And hindsight is 2020. 2020, ha ha ha.
Hindsight is pandemic.
We gotta come up with a new phrase. But it was like, of course, this guy got elected. He's Barack Obama, but electing Barack Hussein Obama in 2008 was an impossible task.
Right.
And by 2016, I think a lot of us forgot that.
Right.
And those of us who had worked on the campaign forgot what it took to elect a candidate, any candidate, but especially Obama. And there was this feeling in America at the time that we had overcome a lot of racism and sexism that, now we recognize that was an absurd belief. But, in 2016, there was this expectation that Hillary Clinton would win the election. And so a lot of us who had done the work in 2008 had watched Barack Obama get reelected in 2012. The day that Trump was elected was just this. I remember sitting on the floor of my childhood bedroom. I had to get up at like 6 a.m. to go back to college because I'd gone to watch the election with my parents. And I just sat on the floor in the dark with my laptop open, with my mouth open, just staring at the headlines. Because it wasn't just, oh my God, this has happened. It was, I knew what it took to win an election and I did nothing. And there were a lot of us in 2016 who felt a personal guilt. And that's kind of an absurd thing to say, that any one person could cause, 2016. There were a lot of factors, but at the same time, Hillary Clinton lost by a few votes in a few key precincts.
Yes.
Exactly.
That the Trump campaign had targeted and knew what they were doing. Like, that was, you hate to give Trump credit, but there was some clever data analysis for him to win that campaign.
And when you look at it from the perspective of that 2008 grassroots movement, if we had done just a little bit more work, we wouldn't have had, there's a good chance that we would have had a different outcome in 2016.
Absolutely.
So then you go through the Trump administration, and living in the Deep South during that administration was just it was bad anywhere you were, but it was especially bad there. And a lot of, there's permanent, I lost a lot of family just to political ideology, and like cousins that babysat me as a kid would no longer talk to me or my brother or my dad or my mom or any of the family. Wow. And it was, politics, I go from 2008 and then I got back into politics in 2020. The reason that it took me so long to get back in politics is because it's such a depressing, it's
That's
just
why we drink.
Yeah. It's especially problematic when you don't drink.
Yeah.
That's right.
But it felt insurmountable, and especially in a state like Georgia that we had not turned blue since 1992 when Clinton won the presidency, and we hadn't won a Senate seat since 2000 when Zell Miller was a Democrat who won the Senate, one of our Senate seats. And so going into politics in 2020, there were a lot of people, when I finally got back into it, who worked in 2008. I was like, hey, do you guys want to work on this campaign with me? And people just kind of patted me on the head and said, that's nice. You go
there.
That.
Oh my God.
It was just so, when you get into a race, it hurts a lot more if you get into it and then lose. It hurts even more knowing going into the race that you're going to lose pretty badly. And so I was sitting watching John Lewis's funeral with all of this going on in the background of just politics being so terrifying, honestly, to get back into. And John Lewis was the same way that Barack Obama was to me. He was the last of the big six civil rights leaders. He was our representative from Georgia, and he was larger than life. He was like the superhero of the American mythos. And sitting down for that funeral, was listening to Barack Obama's eulogy, and I hadn't heard Barack Obama speak in a while. He had really remained quiet for the Trump administration, and this was one of the first times I had heard him speak with like a full speech. And I expected a eulogy for a superhero, and Barack Obama starts talking about this very ordinary kid who was very small, and I'm 4'8", so like the small thing resonated.
Yes.
And he gave a eulogy for a very ordinary person and made it very clear that the people who change history in America are the very ordinary people. And he reminded a lot of us that worked in 2020 in Georgia, heard the same eulogy and felt the same thing. We were reminded, the people that elected Barack Obama, he wasn't just Barack Obama. We elected him. It was all the people behind him. And you have to recognize that our leaders cannot be leaders without all the people marching behind them. And so while I was listening to that eulogy, Barack Obama said, I think the quote was, America was built by John Lewis's, by just very ordinary people who had an understanding of what ordinary can be and the way that you can take that and do extraordinary things. So while I was sitting there listening to this eulogy, I signed up for my first phone bank since 2008. And then from there,
Bless Obama's heart.
I know. And from there, I got into the digital organizing team with the Democratic Party of Georgia. And that was in the end of July, I think. And by August, I was doing a lot of the messaging for the digital organizing team in Georgia. So my job was to craft responses to 7 million voters who were communicating with us on a daily basis. And through all of that, one of the most interesting things that I had to do was, you had to write policy responses. But one of the things that I did most often was convince people that their votes would matter in a state like Georgia, and convince people, even on our team, you can't march towards a finish line that you don't believe exists. So part of our strategy in Georgia was not just, here's how we're going to reach out to voters. It was convincing people that their votes would matter in a state that hadn't mattered. We didn't have resources. We didn't have money. No one believed Georgia was going to flip. At the time, we all thought Texas was likely to flip because we hadn't recognized that the Latino vote was switching directions. And the money was in Kentucky, where everybody wanted to get rid of Mitch McConnell, despite the fact he was polling 30 points ahead. So in Georgia, we had no resources. For the whole general election, we only had 4 paid staff members, and the rest of us did up to 80-hour weeks for nothing.
Wow.
And there was one late night staff meeting where we would do these kind of icebreaker things, and our fearless leader, Stasha Yim, was the director of the digital organizing team. And she asked us one night, this was a couple of weeks before the general election, why are you doing this work? Because when you're doing 80-hour weeks with no pay, it takes a lot to do that, especially in a state like Georgia, where it's very unrealistic that we are going to flip this state. And so I had my Obama story and feeling like I couldn't get back into politics, and then feeling like I kind of had to. And I heard that was the theme of so many people that spoke that night on our team. Like I did the work in 2008. I didn't do it in 2016. And I think one guy said, like, I knew what it took and I did nothing. And if I don't do the work now, I can't live with myself.
Yeah.
So the Georgia team, we were really, we were running off of desperation and of avoiding the reality that we're living in right now. And then also the hope of 2008, because we remembered what it took then. And Barack Obama was getting more involved in politics at that point. He was going around and speaking alongside Biden and Kamala Harris. But that was the Democratic Party of Georgia, like my um, getting back into politics there. And then we miraculously, and I say miraculously, we were working 80-hour weeks. We flipped Georgia for the first time since 1992.
Yeah.
And then we in Georgia had this second chance that a lot of states didn't get because during the general election, we were really building the plane as we were flying it. We
Yeah.
didn't know really what we were doing until we were doing it. We didn't have any resources. And then we had the runoff and we kind of got a redo. So we got to have a much more stable, campaign going into that. And we also had the benefit of a lot of people in the general election who just didn't think their voices would matter. Some of my friends came to me after the general election and they were like, you proved me wrong and thank you for that.
Aw.
And a lot of people got out and voted for the first time in a runoff because we had convinced them you can make a difference. And then we won 2 Senate seats. And we went from this, we weren't even considered a battleground state to briefly being the center of the political universe. And then from there, I took that experience and went into the 14th district, which is Marjorie Taylor Greene's congressional district. That's where I grew up. And I took this experience in Georgia where we had done so many impossible things. And I went into the 14th district thinking, oh, there will be a lot of that. Oh, I didn't believe my voice would matter. And now it does. And I'm going to do all this work. And that was not what I experienced. I spent a year trying to get people to do voter outreach and I couldn't get anybody to join. I was the chair of the volunteer coordinating committee for the Whitfield County Democratic Committee. And the whole time I was the chair, I didn't have a single volunteer.
Wow.
And I realized that the people in Marjorie Taylor Greene's congressional district were in the same spot that I was before I was listening to Obama's eulogy at John Lewis's funeral.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot march towards a finish line that you don't believe exists. And in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, only 25% of our district votes Democratic. And we didn't have anybody running against MTG. We're going to call her that because she's a long name.
Yeah.
It also stands for Magic the Gathering. So my friends get a little confused when I use that. But
Yes.
for all intents and purposes, political meaning.
In the political world, yes.
But I had to figure out how to get people to do work in the 14th district because to my mind, it was possible to make a difference here, but I had to be able to get people to do work. And so I had to kind of make a new strategy of not only can I give people tools and not only can I make the voter outreach as easy as possible, I also have to get people to believe that that outreach can do anything. Mm-hmm. So I started doing inspirational speeches in the district and kind of bringing back in that hope aspect of the Obama campaign. And hope, when you start studying civil rights leaders and reading their speeches and reading their books, hope comes up over and over again. And
interesting.
It's this idea of not, I hope tomorrow is better. I hope that we win the election. But the way that John Lewis explains hope, it kind of becomes this religious thing where hope is something that it's like putting your faith in a higher power. Mm-hmm. And the higher power is all of the people around you working towards that same goal. And it's kind of this idea of God helps those who help themselves. And if you're willing to get up and do the work, then something is going to come of it. And what made Obama's strategy in 2008 so successful was not just him being this person and providing these policies and all that, but giving people the hope that they could change their own circumstances. Mm-hmm. And electing Barack Obama would have been impossible without that aspect because you have to have every person who believes in him getting up and doing the work.
The audacity of hope.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so I had to figure out how to create that in the 14th district. And it took just inspirational speeches and bringing that back in. And it really helped That was the missing piece. I spent almost a year and a half, just not being able to get anybody to do volunteer work. And then it was just that missing piece. And it was what I had experienced at that funeral of, oh, it's me. It's the little people that make that. It's not these larger than life figures. The superheroes of the American mythos, we don't have those. This isn't a comic book. This is just regular people. And so the inspirational speeches plus teaching people the tools was really what made the difference. And I did a series of 13 voter outreach workshops where one, I taught people like you make the difference. And then two, we need to change the language that we use to discuss politics. And so the focus of the workshops were one, getting people to believe in themselves, getting people to believe that this is possible, and then teaching them the tools of the trade. So the first thing I had to do was let's change the way that we think about this district. Because when you look at it from Democrats and Republicans only, you look at the pie chart and it's 25% Democrats, 75% Republicans. And that's insurmountable. You can't do much with that. But when you look at non-voting population, because not everybody is voting, you're only getting about 60% voter turnout on a really good day. So if you add in the non-voting population, and this was what I studied when I went to Johns Hopkins University, was non-voters. When you add those people in, you have 25% Democrats, and then you have this 30% chunk of non-voters. And these are people who are not tied to a political party, so they're persuadable. And you have to persuade them to get to the polls, but you have a lot more opportunity with that group than you do with MAGA Republicans, who are very
high. Is it 30%? I didn't think the number would have been quite that swayable.
Yeah. In the 2020 election, the most politicized, high-profile election we've ever had, more people didn't vote than voted for Biden nationally.
Right.
So it's this huge chunk. And in midterm elections, that number goes up significantly.
Yeah. It does,
So in my district during a presidential election, it's about 25-30% are non-voters. During a midterm election, it goes up to 51% are non-voters.
That's crazy.
And then you get down to local elections, and if y'all want to guess what the average turnout for a local school board election is,
12%.
It's about 8 to 10%.
Oh my God.
So you have 92% of the population that are non-voters.
Yeah.
And if you can tap into that, you have a lot more opportunity to flip really difficult districts. So if we add, if you look at that 75-25% chart, it looks insurmountable, but when you add in the non-voting population, suddenly it's not so difficult to win that district. So that was the first thing I did. And then how do you talk to non-voters? Because they are not paying attention to politics. They're not persuadable by typical politics. If they were, they would be voting.
Right.
So the way that I explained this was through this example of my dad and my brother are both doctors. And when they get in a room and they talk to each other over Christmas, for instance, they are basically speaking Latin. And there's words with 12 syllables, and I don't know what's happening. And I and my sister-in-law and my mom, we leave the room because we don't want to feel stupid. We don't know what's going on. So we leave. We let them finish talking about gastrointestinal, heart that I don't even know. And then when they're done, we come back in. Well, that same thing happens in politics.
Absolutely, it does.
When the three of us are talking about politics, when we get started talking to each other, there's this political jargon that comes in that is very complex. And it's something that it's very easy to forget how much we know. Like the way that my dad and my brother forget how much the people around them don't have that medical background to understand what's going on. If I start talking with this political jargon, then it alienates the people around me. And the issue is when people leave that conversation of politics, they often leave civic engagement as well.
Right.
And so the way that we talk about politics creates non-voters. And so part of getting people to come back into civic engagement is changing the language of politics. And so to do that, it's Stacey Abrams gave us a inspirational speech like the week before the 2020 election at the Democratic Party of Georgia. And she explained the non-voting, undecided voter block. And she said, we have to recognize that these are not people who don't care about politics. They are focused on 2 or 3 or 4 jobs, and they're trying to keep food on the table, and they're trying to keep the heat on, and they're trying to make sure their kids get to school. And politics has become this, to somebody who's not paying attention 24/7, it can look like a bunch of guys in suits yelling at each other on stage. And a lot of what they're yelling is the same on both sides. And to us who understand what the word Democrat and the word Republican mean and all of the background of why they're screaming at each other, we understand that there's a big difference between the candidates and the parties and all this. But most people don't. Most people are not political junkies. Most people don't. I mean, most of us don't have cable or television anymore. I don't have a television in my house. I don't have access to the 24-hour news cycle. It's very difficult to keep up. And so when we do talk about politics, a lot of what I focused on in workshops was we have to take a step back and recognize most people don't have this background. And so we have to remember how much we know and get back to the real world focus of politics, the stuff that matters every day to the average voter or non-voter.
How much of that has actually changed over the years? Like, democracies are hundreds of years old, and it has always been a lot of men in suits talking and a whole lot of disinterested people. So what's actually changed?
I think today the major difference is just the lack of resources.
But that's not new either. We had a moment maybe 20, 30 years ago when cable TV was a big thing, but go back 100 years, no.
I think the difference now is what I recognize. There's always been this problem of having a large non-voting bloc. That hasn't changed.
That's true.
But when I think about having to get in touch with non-voters today, if you think about this from the perspective of maybe the 20s, and you have newspapers and you have radio and you have all of the access,
you have horses and carriages and people going around trying to, maybe you had newspapers. I'm just coming through with a whole bunch of stuff with my grandparents and their boxes of paper, which is why this is all in my head. They didn't have newspapers on the farm. They barely had radio. So
interesting.
Yeah, they only knew the little bits and pieces that somebody would have walked and in the Canadian prairies, farms are quite a distance apart. So they would have known what the gossip was at church on Sunday mornings, and they would have known whatever the potluck social was on Wednesday night. But otherwise, no, they didn't have access to this sort of information.
So to that, I think one of the differences is what you're going to hear at like the local diner or after the softball game or whatever. That kind of the local gossip is going to be, you're still going to hear that local gossip. But today, I think the difference is there's so much noise and there's so much disinformation that a lot of that gossip, depending on what side you're listening to, is completely opposite. And I think back in the day, there was more, when politicians spoke, there was more focus on actual factual information versus now there's so much disinformation on both sides. It's difficult, I think, when you hear that gossip to discern what's real and what isn't real. So I think that's one difference. And then the ways, like if you're just listening to, for instance, Oh, this is so difficult. In my district, one of the problems is one of the main places that people can go for knowing when an election is, who's running, all this kind of stuff is on the internet. And the internet, there's a lot of North Georgia that has no internet access.
Interesting.
So one of the problems is if you live in Dalton, Georgia, which is where I grew up, it's kind of the urban area. And you have Wi-Fi access. You go to the McDonald's and, everybody has a phone basically at this point. And if you're in an area with Wi-Fi, you can at least kind of scroll through the news or social media or whatever and get a basic idea of, oh, there's an election right now. But if you go over 15 minutes to Murray County, there's a large portion of the population that has nothing. There are no newspapers anymore. There's no television. There's no cable. There's also no internet access. So
interesting.
Having our main source of information now is internet, and there's a large rural population that has no internet. So one of the difficulties of working in my district is there's very, very basic information that's missing in these areas. And one of the things that leads to this non-voting block is lack of resources. A large portion of that non-voting block, there's very little bit of it that's apathy. A large portion of it is people who lack resources, whether they be information resources or physical resources. So we don't have public transportation in the Deep South. So if you need to get to the polls, we have fewer and fewer polling locations. If you need to get to the polls and it's 10, 15 miles away, you're probably not going to be able to vote. You don't have a car. There's no public transportation. So there's all of these pieces that I agree with you. A lot of it, is not that different. Like the difficulties that face the non-voting population are similar throughout history, but there's a lot of factors in this very big difference between, oh God. It's late in the day, and I'm trying to think of the name.
It's all right.
The difference in socioeconomic status.
Yes, yeah, that's for sure.
There's this huge difference now between the people that have and the people that have literally nothing. And I think during my grandparents' time, there were more people in the middle. They knew a little bit of what was going on. Maybe they didn't know all of it. It's so difficult to know all of it now because we have this 24-hour news cycle. There's so much more news than there was. There's so much more disinformation than there was. And there's so many resources that I have that the people who live 15 minutes away from my parents just don't have and have never had.
It's also so different. Like even the concept of the morning newspaper. Even in poorer areas, in lower class areas, there would still be a way to find the morning newspaper or the afternoon newspaper or what it was. And you'd flip to it and it was a curated selection of news. Everybody has an opinion, but any newspaper I know of still to this day makes an attempt at having a variety of opinions and sources and stories, and because that's just interesting to read anything that reinforces what you believe over and over and over again gets boring. So losing that source of some sort of an editor, a curated collection of news is definitely a problem. The other problem is now we have this assumption that when news breaks, news finds us. So we don't go looking for information. We sort of wait for news to break and then we're inundated by it. But the thought of actually sitting down and reading, watching the 6 o'clock news or reading the newspaper is just gone from our heads. You talk about the 24-hour news cycle, but the only time we ever watch the news is when hell breaks loose. Otherwise, the cable channels, and the ratings bear this out, nobody watches the cable channels unless something weird happens, and then we're all glued to it. So the 24-hour news cycle is sort of the occasional news cycle.
That's interesting.
And then, too, it's just so overwhelming. I don't have the capacity to take in all that information.
No.
So even me,
So
when
we
it's
all
my
follow
job,
one story, one or two stories.
exactly, and then
we overindulge on the one thing that is whatever currently happening because we just
Or we
can't
skim
have
across
it.
the top and get the highlights.
Yep.
right, and then the other problem is there used to be local news, and so much of it now it's become national.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking about trying to figure out who's running in the midterms in your local precinct or your district, there's nowhere to find that information now except the internet.
Except the internet. And
And if you
sometimes even
don't
there,
have that,
yeah.
and if you don't have that, one, you don't know where to go, even if you have it. But if you don't have the internet, there is no access to the local news anymore.
Sure.
Because those big stories that come out, for instance, this week it's Venezuela, that is an international news story.
Yeah.
And there's nowhere to find what's going on
Locally.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. The disappearance of local news because there was not enough people willing to pay the bills for local journalists to go do what they do is an interesting phenomenon, and in many ways a North American phenomenon. Like when I look around the world, local news is still a thing in good chunks of the world. It just seems to have disappeared here, which is frustrating. The other thing I was thinking about now as you were talking about that was the difference between like news and opinion, which, so many people get their news from a Substack and like, that's not news. That's an opinion. And opinions are very valuable things, of course, but it's the people that read opinion, and because opinions are written to back up your point of view, don't realize that that's an opinion and not what a traditional news source would have been.
And it's the same for comedians, getting your news from comedians, which is a big source for a lot of people. So how do we reach the people who live 15 miles away from you who don't have access to this information?
I was still thinking about
what do we do, Kathleen?
There's parts of the United States that don't have internet access?
Yes. Oh, yes.
There's
Biden tried to
Or
fix that.
is it an income thing? Like people just aren't subscribing to it, or you physically
No,
cannot get on the internet?
The
Not
Wi-Fi
available.
just is not available. And that was one of the major things in this past. There was a public service commission. There were 2 public service commission seats in Georgia that were big news across the country, or at least they made their way up into the DC news circuit, because the Georgia Public Service Commission, one, utility prices are astronomical in Georgia. They've just gone up year after year after year after year. And then also there's not a lot of focus on rural areas. There's just no infrastructure.
There's no vote.
Yeah. And so those public service commissioner seats, we flipped those seats. Those went to 2 Democrats for the first time in a very long time because the public services in Georgia are so bad.
Wow.
And one of them is Wi-Fi access. A lot of North Georgia during the pandemic, you had kids walking to McDonald's parking lots just to do schoolwork because there just was no access. Even if you had the money to pay for it, there's no infrastructure of Wi-Fi. And that's the way, I know it's that way in North Georgia. I'm assuming it's that way in a lot of the rural South.
It is.
It's just
and not just the South, just in rural areas. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, that is.
And especially, and I say especially the
like
South.
The businesses can get it, but they've just not wired it up to the houses.
No, there's just not a focus on it. So the way that you overcome this is a very old school form of voter outreach. It's grassroots organizing. It is going and knocking on doors. It is talking to your neighbors, because those people who live 15 minutes away from me, I have access to them. They don't have access to resources, but they have access to me.
Right.
And so the thing that I focused on in these workshops is peer-to-peer organizing. And it's the thing that we did in 2008. And in 2008, we made a 3.9 point leftward shift in our county in this very deep red district.
Wow.
And with this work that I was doing in the 14th district from 2020 to 2022, we had an 8.9 point leftward shift.
Wow.
And it works when you recognize, one, the people around you. It's not, you have to recognize that in our district, there's a lot of MAGA people who are not interested in listening. There's also a lot of people who are interested in listening, who want information. And there's a lot of non-voters who have stayed out of politics because it seems so toxic and there's so much disinformation. you change the language that you use. You start talking more about policy than politics. You start focusing on this is a candidate who wants to bring Wi-Fi access to this area. You focus on this is the candidate that wants to fix the potholes in I-75 so you're not driving around like Mario Kart trying to avoid a flat tire. And when you start talking about it like that, people start to listen. And when you reach out to the people around you who don't get news on their phone, who don't have Wi-Fi access, who don't pay attention to the news, who don't pay attention to politics, but pay attention to me because I'm their friend, that's when you make the difference in these areas where there isn't a lot of state and national voter outreach. I have access to these people. This is the thing that makes the difference every single time. This is how the civil rights movement made such a difference in the South. This is how every big movement has changed, has made gains, is you do the hard work. It's hard. You have to get out and you have to put your working shoes on and go and have conversations, but that's the thing that makes the difference. And it's very old school. It's very low commitment for all intents and purposes, but it's the thing that makes the difference. Phone banking doesn't work. Text banking doesn't work. Canvassing, when you're talking about people who work 3 or 4 jobs, canvassing hours are not going to work because those people aren't home.
Right.
You have to it's the peer-to-peer organizing.
Wow.
So my work in the 14th district was 1, you get people to believe that the work that they're doing can make a difference. 2, you get them to believe in themselves. And 3, you get them to start having conversations with people who maybe don't agree on every issue, but have a shared life experience of it's really hard to pay my rent. It's really hard to pay healthcare. The roads here are awful. There's no Wi-Fi access. And when you start having those conversations and politics becomes, here are tangible solutions to the most pressing problems of our daily lives, that's when you can get people out to the polls. And I think this is one of the things that the DNC and the liberal elite and the old guard just really consistently is shooting themselves in the foot. They poll test language and they spend millions on data and they speak as if they know what's best for us without ever getting out and listening to the people in their districts and having conversations. Because that's when you make connections in your area. That's when when you listen and respond, which is what we learned to do in 2008, that's when people get interested. They have to want to go out and vote. You can't just say vote Dems and expect to make a difference. You have to say, here is this problem that we have just talked about. I understand what it's like to have the minimum wage in Georgia is still $7.25 an hour.
Oh my God.
It's impossible to pay rent with just one job anymore. It's impossible. Like this lived experience is so difficult. The price of living is crazy. Here are tangible solutions to this problem. When you provide a non-voter with a way to directly make a difference in their daily life, when you hand them not just here's a cool candidate, but when you say here is your personal superpower, that's the way I describe the vote, is this is your personal superpower. When people understand that they can make a difference in their daily lives, that's when people get out to vote. That's when you make real gains in the non-voting community. That was one of the major things that we were able to do in Georgia, is talk about politics not as vote Dems, but as tangible solutions to problems. And that was one of the big things that Stacey Abrams focused on and was able to do such good work in the state of Georgia, is changing the language that we use to talk about politics. It's not Democrats and Republicans and vote for this guy, vote for this guy. It is, here is your way to lower your rent prices. Here is your way to bring Wi-Fi access so your kids don't have to walk to the McDonald's to do their schoolwork. Here is the way that you make a difference. Here's the intrinsic motivation that you need to not just get out in this election, but go out in the next election and go out in the next election.
Yes.
It's handing people information and resources so that they recognize that they have a way to make a difference in their lives. It's giving them autonomy. It's giving them, it can feel really hopeless. and it's giving them hope by saying, this is how this changes. Here's what you can do right now. So that was a lot of the work that I did. You have to provide tangible solutions to the most pressing problems, and you have to genuinely care about people. And that's the thing that I think the DNC and the old guard just really misses, is they provide solutions, but there's not that genuine care, because to genuinely care, you have to personally understand the problem. And to personally understand it, you either have to be living it or listening to the people. And that's why people like Mamdani and Bernie Sanders and AOC do consistently well among Democrats and Trump voters, because they're not talking about just amorphous politics. They're talking about, like Mamdani, rent prices and the price of public transportation. Those are things that affect all voters. It doesn't matter what party you're a part of. That's the lived experience.
Right.
It is sitting in rooms with the voters and listening to them. When we were at CrookedCon, when Rachel and I were at CrookedCon, so many of those sessions that I was sitting in was like, God, I've been saying this for years.
Yes,
and all they were doing was saying, how did you, it was people who had worked on Mamdani's campaign, for instance, and they were like, how did you do it? What was your secret? And he's like, we listened to people. I mean, it is really that simple. And it can't just be Mamdani. It has to be people like you and me who are not running for office, but we have the resources and the information that people are missing. We have to reach out into our communities and do this grassroots organizing work. And it doesn't have to be knocking on doors and spending an hour phone banking. It can be something as simple as texting 3 friends and offering, hey, do you know there's an election tomorrow? Because that's another thing. A lot of people don't know that local elections exist. A lot of people don't know what midterms are. And that sounds crazy. Yeah. But, if you don't, you're likely to hear in the local gossip there's a presidential election. You're much less likely when you have only 8% voter turnout for a local school board election. You're very unlikely to hear about that. So when I reach out to 3 friends, literally in the Whitfield County Democratic Committee meeting, I spent a year trying to get this group to text 3 of their friends. And they kept telling me, Kathleen, all my friends vote. All my friends vote. It's not going to make a difference. Right. And I finally held up the front page of the newspaper that said, there's an election tomorrow. 99% of Dalton, Georgia has not voted. And I said, are all of your friends in the 1%? That's crazy. Tell me your secret. And so all of us in that group sitting there, we all reached out to 3 people, and we won a city council seat by 40 votes.
Wow.
Yes, wow.
And those 40 votes came from
the room.
That committee meeting.
Yes.
It's the littlest things make the biggest difference. And that's the thing that has been a through line in all of my political work. In 2008, we were working in one of the most conservative parts of the country. We had no chance of winning Georgia in 2008. But because of the work that we did in 2008, we were able to win in 2020.
Right.
And it can feel as though I'm not going to be the one to make the difference. But it's really the opposite. If all of us who said that got out and did just the tiniest bit of work, it does make the difference. And 11,000 votes, when you break it down county to county in Georgia, it's only about 80 votes per county. And that's hardly anything. That's a committee meeting where everybody in the committee texts 3 people. Those are the things that make the difference. And it really is the recognition of I can make a difference in this district. And it's just having that mindset. Even these small acts, I love to bring up the very famous image right before Bloody Sunday, where John Lewis and Hosea Williams were marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And it later became the March from Selma to Montgomery. But that picture, I love to show it in workshops because John Lewis and Hosea Williams are larger than life figures. We remember them in history. We know their names. But if you look at that picture and you take away all those people marching behind them, they were just 2 guys on a bridge. and you cannot win a race that way. You can't create a movement that way. You can't do anything with two guys on a bridge. It's all of the people behind them whose names we don't remember. Those are the people that make the difference.
Yeah. A lot of what you're saying was echoed in Mamdani's inauguration, which I'm sure you watched.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was said. That point was made again and again. He made it, and the other people who were inaugurated that day made it. And it was, yeah, it's very moving to see that in action and to see it in our time. You know, it's one thing to see it in the historic pictures that they're incredibly moving in their own way, but to actually watch that in real time is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yes, I also wanted to ask you what it was like being significantly younger than the people you were training. One thing that stayed with me from our first conversation was you said when you arrived, I think it was in the 14th district, and their strategy was turn out the Democratic vote. And you said, then we'll lose 25%. We have to do more. And they listened to you. So how did you make that happen?
Well, one thing was it's difficult because I got into politics in that district. They're generally the Democratic county committees are much older. I was the youngest on my committee, I think by 20 or 30 years.
Right.
And there's just a generational difference. And, you know, you could in the 80s and the 90s, you could focus on turning out Democrats and maybe make a difference, but it's just not that way anymore. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what I had to do was recognize that this strategy did work at some point. A lot of it is going in and recognizing that I'm not better than the people in this that have been doing this for a long time. I just have a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And getting people to listen to that perspective was difficult, but a lot of it was I had to figure out how to say it in such a way that it made sense. And when I first got there, I did a lot of, if you guys just do it, you can make it happen. And they're like, Kathleen, this is a really tough district to work in. I had to recognize where they were coming from. And I had to recognize, the reason that it's so difficult for them to go out and do really tough voter outreach work where you're talking to voters in your district, they're looking at it from the perspective of most of the people around us are Republicans, and they're Republicans who hate us on a very spiritual level and who are unwilling to listen.
Right.
And it is really dangerous in a lot of these areas to go out because you don't know if somebody's going to bring a shotgun to the front door. I mean, it's just it's a scary area to work in politics in the Deep South. Huh. And I had to recognize, it's not that they don't want to do the work. It's that they physically, spiritually don't feel like they can. Mm-hmm. And I had to figure out how to recognize where they were coming from and relate on really that the kind of the level of the heart and recognize the place that they are right now is where I was before I listened to the eulogy that Obama gave at John Lewis's funeral. There's a hopelessness in this area. And I have to be able to overcome that hopelessness and give people hope and then also provide a solution. I can't just say, here's what you got to do. Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's exactly the same strategy you're talking about applying to non-voters. Exactly.
Yeah. You can't go in holier than thou. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the problems that I see over and over again with the leadership at the DNC and liberal elite and the old guard. It's going in and saying, you have the same problem with the old guard saying to young people, we know what we're doing, do it our way. Right. I can't do that to the older generation because it's the same problem. Mm-hmm. You have to listen. You have to do active listening. You have to recognize that there is value in their perspective and then find a place to come together on it. I can't say I'm smarter than you, do it my way, because I'm not. Mm-hmm. There's a medium, but you have to work together. You can't work against each other. And a lot of the problems in the Democratic Party is infighting. It's that's what was so refreshing about being at CrookedCon. You had, for instance, Crooked Media, which is just this very, very, very progressive mindset. And then you also had the Bulwark, which is a more conservative mindset. And you had them working together.
Yeah.
That's
often on the same panels and often not agreeing with each other. But they made some really interesting sessions.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And that was a lot. It's the same way with the generations. I'm more progressive than my liberal older counterparts. And you have to be able to talk to each other and work together. You can't say I'm better than you, whether it be political or age-based or whatever.
Right.
It's the what we learned in our 12-hour Obama training camp in Atlanta. You have to listen to each other. And it's what they said over and over again at CrookedCon. How did you do it? We listened to each other.
We listened, yes.
That's it. It's so simple, but it's so groundbreaking.
That's absolutely true. So you were telling us your journey, and we got you as far as the 14th district in Dalton County. And tell us the rest.
Well, after the 2022 midterms, we made gains in the 2022 midterms. We had an 8.9 point Democratic shift in Marjorie Taylor Greene's congressional district, which is very significant. And after the midterms, I moved into the academic sphere of politics because I had this hands-on experience, and I really wanted to back it up with, like, from an academic sense, from the theory of communications, I've seen this stuff work, but does it work everywhere? And so I went to Johns Hopkins University and studied political communications. One of my focuses was behavior change. One of my focuses was the non-voting demographic. And I got to dig into the research and figure out, was what I was seeing something that was it just something I was seeing, or is that the way that it works on a broader scale? And it is. And I got to learn more about the non-voting bloc and be able to point to specific things. I had seen them, but I didn't know how to describe them in, a broader academic sense. And so I've spent the past 2 years getting my political communications degree in the Washington, D.C. Johns Hopkins campus, and rounding out my lived experience with the academic theory side of politics. And now I've spent the past year trying to get a job in politics in the DC area because I think we've got a 10% unemployment rate at least. And everybody I know has been fired from the federal government. And the way people up here are describing it is trying to get a job in 2008 when the economy had collapsed. That's what it's like in this area.
Right.
And it's just, I'm a bar manager at a museum bar in the DuPont neighborhood in DC. And I and one of my best friends, we're both bar managers at this place. And I have all this experience in Democratic Party of Georgia and the 14th district and all that. And he was fired from USAID. And the two of us, he just got a job after 237 job applications.
Oh, my God.
And I'm on something like 180.
Oh, my God.
And so right now, I'm trying to get work.
So what is your ideal job? Tell us what you're looking for.
I mean, anything.
We're going to help you find a job? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, anything at this point.
We're going to send out this episode far and wide. Kathleen needs a job.
Hey, guys, hire me.
Rachel and I can't get hired for this.
I'm looking for something in the communications sphere. I did a lot. My job at the Democratic Party of Georgia was messaging. It was communicating with voters. It was figuring out how to, any question that we got from voters in the state of Georgia, I had to figure out how to answer.
Right.
And so my job was, our volunteers would send out texts, and any response that came back that our volunteers didn't know how to answer or didn't have like a response in their message bank of responses, they sent it to us.
Right.
And so I had to come up with policy responses. It was very rapid response.
Yeah.
I had to come up with a policy response in real time. I had to dig into Warnock's policy and Ossoff's policies and Biden's policies. And we would have disinformation and misinformation campaigns that would come in that some of them we had heard about in the news and we were ready for, but some of them were so targeted to specific communities, we didn't know they existed until they showed up in our text responses.
Wow.
And so then we would have to, in real time, go find out, where did this come from? What is this? And also be able to discern, is somebody just trolling us or is this real?
Right.
And so there was a lot of...
Are they
it was
actually
all
eating pets?
Yeah, exactly. There's very weird things that we heard. There's very weird stuff that we heard. So one of the jobs that I just applied to was a rapid response contributor at the Bulwark. And then I just applied for a job at... it's a local organization that provides job training and opportunities for economic mobility by really providing resources, kind of in the same way that my work in the 14th district was figuring out how to provide resources and information to non-voters.
Right.
This organization kind of does the same thing, but for economic mobility versus getting people to vote.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a wide net.
Right.
There's a lot that you can do with a background in communications, and I've figured that out as I've been applying to jobs. And at this point, honestly,
though. It doesn't sound like you found a job.
It's going to work. It's going to work.
I'll do anything at this point.
All right. Well, world, hear this.
Yeah. If anybody's listening and you need, somebody with the specific background that I have, I also learn fast, I'll figure it out.
Kathleen, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for sharing all of this. Your story. Your story is amazing.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. We certainly enjoyed having you in the cafe.
Yes.
If you live outside the U.S., please register with your voting state at votefromabroad.org every year. Do it now. To find all our episodes, go to democratsabroad.org and look for us in the drop-down menus. I'm Rachel Oikster with David Schellenberg in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for listening to Democrats Abroad, the Blue Vote Cafe.